Have you ever wondered where Western stories, such as those starring people like John Wayne, come from? Pretty much everyone knows what these stories are, but where did they truly originate? Throughout our research for this project, we came across the Harry F. Olmsted Papers, which were essentially Western magazines that came out between 1939 and 1945. So this is right around the time of World War II. These papers marked the first real Hollywoodization element of the West, or Wyoming, which is the myth that we are interested in for this project. This is marked by the creation of stories in which there are characters who still exhibit code hero-esque characteristics. These are things like a centralized cowboy who is chivalrous and does stuff like rescuing people and choosing the morally right option. Women are held in high regard by the cowboy. There's a semi-predictable quest in each of the stories, and there's also definitely an element of the story where there's just a tough guy who can take care of his own business. These stories also had supporting characters who offered hero characteristics themselves, such as trustworthiness, respect, compassion, and responsibility. These stories were in stark contrast to the present events of the world. World War II brought out all of the worst characteristics of humanity. This is things like chemical warfare, mass casualties, and genocide. The mystification of the West was done to present hope and morality to a population that was struggling with immorality. These stories offered individuals an opportunity to escape the stresses of a war-torn world into an almost utopian view of the world. The sensationalized view of the West becomes evident when the advertisements placed in the magazines are examined, which Colin will talk about later. These magazines also offer a redefinition of societal roles, especially pertaining to women. They offer a noticeable change from a damsel in distress-esque role to a leading figure capable of taking care of herself, which Ryan will talk about later. The ads also point towards a greater sense of nationalism and patriotism, which Madison will talk about as well.
Although the West and Wyoming are portrayed as a lawless, uncivilized, and overall unsophisticated part of the United States throughout the various stories, the advertisements displayed within the pages directly challenge this portrayal and serve to demonstrate the absurdity of the Western pulp fiction genre. For instance, the advertisement featuring the Liberty trailer presents many, quote, modern home comforts, including flush toilets and electric refrigerators. These amenities directly contrast with the portrayal of the West depicted in the stories and serve to demonstrate that these stories do not accurately represent the culture or technological advancements of the time. Likewise, the advertisement featuring the Gillette razor blades contrasts with the sensationalized nature of the stories. Razor blades are an extremely ordinary, everyday object. With this in mind, it is ironic to see them advertised alongside the sensational Western stories. Ultimately, this serves to make the stories appear even more ridiculous and entirely disconnected from everyday society. The stories portray events intended solely for entertainment, but they fail to include realistic, everyday aspects of society at the time. Certainly, this effectively provides audience with an escape from reality, which was necessitated by the events of World War II. However, the false reality depicted in these stories has largely come to shape the way in which those with little knowledge of Western culture stereotypically view it. These advertisements clearly portray a Western society very different than that depicted within the popular, mythical literature of the time. However, they are not the only way in which the Olmsted Papers challenge commonly believed myths about Wyoming and the West, as Cheyenne and later Madison will now talk about.
Created in World War II, these pulp fiction magazines include insights into Western culture during this time period many overlook. Propaganda was expected, but the audience of these magazines was not. When thinking of Western pulp fiction, a previous misconception might be that the audience was intended to be young boys and just males in general, but the targeted audience expands to wives and mothers too. The discovery of this audience indicates the escalation of social status women were making during this time period, and in the Wyoming area. Many of the men were drafted into the war, fighting overseas while their wives were stuck at home, taking care of everything they left behind. This expanded to more than just household chores. Women were now working in factories and had to pick up a new leadership position in their families, including taking on financial responsibility and finding beloved items at a bargain price. When thinking of Westerns, many think of women as damsels in distress, but the covers definitely tell a different story. Although one might have thought that women didn't really have a role in these pulp fiction stories, the covers feature women who are stepping up and taking charge. The covers give off the theme that women were not as weak as society had told them they were before. As women had to step in society, they had to build up the confidence of a hero. Women had to be reassured that they were in fact capable of much. The patriotic propaganda also told women to be strong. Though women knew that they couldn't fill the shoes their husbands left completely, there were advertisements who went out to women in search of extra hands to get help with the war effort. Madison is going to talk a little bit more about this patriotic propaganda and what these advertisements illuminate about society at the time.
There were many patriotic ads during the 1940s that included classes about commando fighting and jiu-jitsu. These were more directed towards men because women were not allowed to fight. There were ads about joining the war, such as becoming a draftsman. These were directed towards both men and women because the men were drafted into the war and the women helped build many of the ships. This is how Rosie the Riveter became famous, because she put the rivets on the ships. There were ads about working in the government, which were also directed more towards women, because the men were fighting the war and women were needed to work in the government. People were selling handy books to women because without the men, they had to teach themselves how to fix things around the house. Overall, looking through these pulp fiction magazines has opened our eyes to a culture of Wyoming not many people